Okay, great. Why don't we get started? Welcome everyone to our webinar, Benchmarking IT and Critical KPIs. My name is Ken Lee. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Sumis Software. For those of you who are not familiar with Sumis Software, we're a provider of cloud-based IT management applications, providing ITSM, IT asset management, and availability management on the cloud. Our applications are Pink Verified 12 certified, and we were recently nominated as finalists at the Pink Elephant Innovation of the Year Award, as well as the Golden Bridge Awards, cloud computing category. I would like to welcome you to our webinar. We'll be discussing benchmarking IT and critical KPIs. We have two excellent speakers, Eric Wagner and Eddie Vidal. So before we get started, I want to briefly give you an overview of our upcoming webinars. This is part of a series. On September 13th, we'll be talking about enabling the IT service team to do more. September 27th, we'll talk about financial and operational benefits of implementing best practices. And October 18th, we'll talk about unifying IT service management by optimizing service management. You can register for these webinars at our homepage at www.sumissoftware.com. All right, so let me start by introducing our two panelists, Eric Wagner and Eddie Vidal. A little background on Eric Wagner. He spent the last 16 years in the IT service management space on the vendor and application development side. He has extensive experience resolving problems and developing critical service delivery strategies for hundreds of IT environments of all sizes, and is definitely a thought leader in the industry. Eddie has over 20 years of experience in the IT industry, focusing on service delivery and support for IT infrastructures. He's currently the manager of enterprise support services at the University of Miami, supporting over 30,000 users. He also serves as the president of the South Florida HDI local chapter and is the regional director of HDI Southeast region. He's also a board member of the HDI Advisory Board, as well as the HDI Desktop Support Advisory Board. Eddie has spoken extensively at local, regional, and national conferences on topics ranging from IT service delivery metrics, marketing, communication, CRM, databases, leadership, building professional user groups, and call center monitoring. He's also been published in HDI Support World magazine. Eddie has also certifications for ITIL Foundations V2 and V3 and ITIL V3, Intermediate Capability. Okay, so without further ado, let me turn over to Eddie.
Well, thank you very much, Ken, and welcome. On behalf of Eric and myself, I would like to personally thank everybody for joining us for this Benchmarking IT and Critical KPIs webinar, sponsored by Sumis Software. We really appreciate you taking an hour to break away from your day to participate in this webinar. I do want to share with you that when Eric approached me and asked if I would be interested in working with him to put together a webinar on this topic, I was really humbled and honored. And I was really excited because I know from my own personal experience how challenging but important this topic is. I wanted this discussion to be different from many of the other resources on this topic in that I wanted it to be extremely relevant to the audience and leave you with several nuggets that you can take back to your organization, regardless of your size or scale, and be able to use them immediately. Eric agreed with me 100%, and our joint commitment to you is that by the end of this webinar, you're going to be armed with some important information and tools that will help to strengthen your visibility within your executive team and your viability as an IT professional within your organization. So with that being said, let's get started. We have a lot of information to cover. But one thing is to help with the flow of the webinar discussions. During the presentation, we would like all of you to ask questions, but please do so via the chat feature to the right of the screen. We will be compiling those questions and address them during the last 20 minutes or so of this webinar. Until then, we will be muting everybody's line and then opening up the lines again for question and answer session at the end of this webinar. Okay, Eric, if you're ready, let's kick this off.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Eddie. So I'd like to take everyone through the agenda briefly. As Eddie mentioned, we have a lot to cover in a very short time. What we'll be discussing today is the current landscape of the IT environment from the outside looking in, and some of the things an IT manager deals with on a daily basis that accurate metrics and KPIs can and will impact in a positive way. We will discuss in detail the real-life benefits of benchmarking, things like efficiency, effectiveness, and strategy justification. Next, we'll spend some time talking about what could happen if your IT organization maintains the existing or the status quo, meaning that you do nothing at all. What would be the risk to the organization, but also what would be the risk to the IT manager? And once that stage is set, then we'll be able to speak in depth about the three most critical benchmarks: agent cost, duration, and cost avoidance. And then some of the effective strategies for implementing benchmarking. What important questions you need to ask, and some reports or metrics you can use to justify costs and strategies. Now, we realize that all of you may use a different ticketing or service management solution, and Eddie and I built some models in Excel that we can make available to all of you to test your existing benchmark strategies. We will be referring to these Excel spreadsheets throughout this webinar. So at the end of the webinar, we'll let you know who you can contact to get free copies of these models. And I got to give you just a disclaimer. Eddie and I put these models together for you, for the people on this webinar. So they're very accurate and they're reliable, but I have to let you know they're not the prettiest. So lastly, but most importantly, we want to hear from you and answer your questions. So we'll give enough time at the end of the webinar to address some of your questions. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the environment of a typical IT organization. Nearly every year for the last 16 years of my career in IT, the number one mantra of the IT organization is budget, 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 and again, budget. So what we are experiencing as IT managers is that we need to do much more with a lot less. And unfortunately, sometimes IT organizations have a tendency to blame low budgets or budget cuts for a lot of the inefficiency they face in their environment. And in many cases, this is true. But can you as the IT manager prove that a reduction in budget has actually impacted the organization in some way, whether it's through cost or delivery of service? And because of that challenge of being able to actually prove the impact of the organization, there's a constant inspection, whether it's monthly, weekly, or daily, of the goings-on of the IT organization. How are we doing? What can you do better, Mr. or Madam IT Manager or Director? Let me ask this. As an IT professional, how often have you felt totally prepared walking into an executive meeting with you had all your facts and figures available at your fingertips? I'm guessing just from experience that not very many of you felt 100% prepared. But if you were, or if you did feel prepared in some of these executive meetings, I need to ask, was your audience able to consume the metrics or the information that you gave them? Were they able to understand what you were presenting? Or did it seem like that what they were asking and what the language they were using was an entirely different language from yours? And more importantly, they were expecting you to speak their language. When you've been asked to justify a strategy either you or an executive is sponsoring, how long did you spend on that archaeological dig where you're looking for every silo of information and pulling all this information before ultimately you probably end up giving up and you end up submitting your best guess anyway?
Eric, that's a great point and one I can definitely relate with. I've been asked numerous times to justify a project or position, and I spend time attempting to prove or disprove the position based on information that may or may not exist. And if it does, it's rarely in the same location. All this time spent searching and digging is time I spend away from managing the support desk and my day-to-day operation. The next bullet point continues on the same vein. Challenges in recognizing, adjusting, and responding quickly to sudden organizational and business environmental changes. What that means is how well can you recognize and adapt? There's this perception that IT is a reactive and not a proactive type organization. We have all heard this before, but there's some truth to it. Most IT organizations and IT professionals I have contact with have great difficulty monitoring and recognizing trends and reacting quickly enough to positively impact the organization from a productivity or cost standpoint. The next bullet point, great disparity between estimated costs and actual costs. That may not be as obvious in all organizations, but I know we can all relate. Getting a tight handle on costs and budgets is something that we would all like to strengthen. Unreliable agent analyst performance metrics. This addresses the challenges an IT manager faces managing a team. I need help motivating my team, pushing to the next threshold, creating reliable performance metrics that can withstand agent scrutiny. And the last bullet point, it addresses the end user population that you're supporting. If your end users are unhappy, and this is known throughout the organization, then seriously consider how can you gain a seat at the executive table. Solving all of these challenges share the same starting point. What this means is all of those IT challenges and points of inspection can be all addressed from the same simple 3 core benchmarks or KPIs. Over the next couple of slides, we're going to represent just some of these benchmarks, metrics, and reports every IT professional should know and have at their fingertips. All of those benchmarks or inspection points are extremely important to both the IT professional and the executive team. All of them are derived from the 3 basic benchmarks that you're going to learn about in today's webinar. So if you can look at this, here are some basic benchmarking metrics that we have all probably seen before. I would like you to take a few seconds to review these. Probably nothing jumps out at you as something you cannot answer fairly quickly. But what happens when the metrics become a little bit more involved? Look at the first bullet point. How much does it cost the organization to resolve incidents by agent? That seems simple enough, right? Most of you might have an answer and ready to answer that or have it roll off your tongue. But please hold your answer to the end of this webinar because I'm confident it'll change. The next one's a little bit more tricky to answer. What does effective mean to me or my organization? Same with, how quickly does a new agent onboard? I'm sure you can guess and be fairly accurate, but what if you need to have the exact answer? Where would you find it? How long would it take you? Take the next few seconds and review this list that we have up. We're going to be providing the core metrics or benchmark to address all of these questions. So doing nothing has risks and costs associated with it. Whether those costs are visible to you or the executive team in the present or the future, or even if these costs are not directly relational to IT, it doesn't matter. Eventually, someone is going to discover these costs and impose budget constraints, and the cycle will once again repeat itself. While we all as professionals have a fiduciary responsibility to the successes and well-being of the organization, one might argue that we may have an even greater responsibility to ourselves and to our families. I think this is why it's so important to understand the risks of doing nothing. They're even greater to an IT manager's career. If you as an IT professional are constantly having to justify strategy, prove viability of projects, and defend budgets, then you're putting yourself out there on a consistent basis. The risk of being proven incorrect more times than correct is significant, and not having consistent and dependable data points and metrics makes it very hard and risky to constantly push the needle. These are just a few of the many risks that come with the position. The proper utilization of IT benchmarking can help reduce many of these risks. By creating a set of benchmarks for your organization, you're managing proactively versus fighting fires. Usually, when I start working for a new organization or a new area, because I've moved around quite a bit, I realize I have to move from a reactive support model to a proactive one. As I begin to leverage the benchmarking metrics I have used throughout my career, I have the ability to change the culture and maturity of our organization to a business or a customer and business-centric model. In making these changes, it allows you to earn the trust and confidence of your customer, which leads to a seat at the table. Once you're at the table, you need to refrain from IT speak and talk to the business in their terms. Building this foundation provides benefits to the entire organization by reducing total cost of ownership. One thing to keep in mind, the job is never done. You continue to improve your organization with the metrics and benchmarks. Learn the expectations of your business owners and implement continual changes to meet them.
So we've addressed the problem, and I think many of us can relate to every one of these. Now we need to get to what can we do about it. So how do I determine the most critical benchmarks? So from an IT benchmarking perspective, we determined that there are the three most critical benchmarks. These three benchmarks should be consistent with nearly all support desk, IT, service management environments. While there are many more metrics that a typical IT environment needs, and we'll show you some of these as we go through the rest of the presentation, there are three building blocks that are the most of all those metrics that we were talking about earlier can be derived. So let's talk about how they were determined. For the sake of understanding, getting our heads around the core metrics, it might be beneficial for the sake of this discussion if we actually wear the hat of a microbiologist. I know it sounds funny, but imagine how someone might look at the world from a perspective of one who deals with microscopic organisms on a daily basis. Now, I'm not referring to your IT staff. I'm talking about looking at things, researching, analyzing the tiniest organisms on the food chain and how they impact the visible world around us. As an IT manager, you should also be looking for the smallest variable or variables that impact all aspects of the operational world around you. Look for the least common denominator, or the smallest metric from which all other metrics are based. In business, that smallest metric, or those smallest metrics, are time and cost. Time is money, right? We've all heard this many times. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, now that you know, it's the typical mindset of the executive team as well. So how does that apply to the IT manager? Well, cost metrics are based on human resource cost, asset cost, and external operation cost. Some examples of those are agent cost, asset cost, MSP or managed service provider cost, hosting costs, bandwidth costs, communication costs, etc. The list goes on. For the perspectives of service management and incident management, we'll be discussing today agent cost. Another metric is time. Just as in the case with cost, time can have a few fundamental metrics as well. From a service management perspective, the simplest metric is duration. So examples might be call duration, incident duration, resolution time, etc. While they all sound very similar, they must not be confused as the exact same metric. We'll discuss this in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. The last metric is of equal importance as agent cost and duration, but it's typically forgotten or even overlooked. It's the metric that drives executive discussions. It's the language that the executive team is speaking. This is the fundamental metric that should be part of every future justification discussion you have with an executive management member. It gives the IT manager relevance. While this metric might have several different names, it's most often called cost avoidance. So I want to go ahead and break these down. Let's take a deeper look at agent cost. Agent cost at first glance may appear obviously simple, but it's actually much more complex than you might originally think. Or you might be saying, yeah, my incident management solution already reports on this metric, so I really don't need to worry about it. Well, what you don't know might actually be hurting you. Even if your ticketing application tracks this information, you need to know how it tracks, so you may best validate and justify your future recommendations. If you're not currently using an off-the-shelf incident management or service management solution for your ticketing tools, then what we're going to discuss is even more relevant or more important to you. Agent cost is calculated based on the agent's hourly wage or rate. And in some cases, this includes overhead, but not always. It's important to note how your ticketing solution determines agent cost. A lot of generally available solutions calculate agent cost based on an average agent cost. This approach assumes that all agents are created equal and compensated equally. Seriously, is that the case in your environment? Is Jenny compensated exactly the same as Mary? If so, then this model works perfectly for you. If not, this model will afford some potential significant reporting variances, so you just need to be aware of it. We'll show you how much cost risk this model might have on an IT organization in a coming slide. The other calculation is agent overhead. This includes additional employee costs associated with each individual, like benefits, facilities costs, communication costs, federal and state taxes, etc. And honestly, this is an entirely mind-numbing topic with lots of information that you can find on how to calculate it on the web. The most important point to understand is how the hourly rate for agent cost is calculated in your environment. Is it average agent cost or is it actual agent cost? So let me talk about this briefly. Average agent cost model is very simple and assumes all agents are compensated the same regardless of experience, skill set, role, or schedule. The advantage to this method is that it's easy to input and easy to calculate. It requires little maintenance and typically no integration with any HR applications. The disadvantage is that your cost metrics are already slightly skewed at the least common denominator level and will and can exponentially deviate from actual cost the more layers of calculation you apply. So if this is your baseline core metric that you're applying multiple calculations to, and it's slightly skewed at the beginning, when you start averaging and multiplying, you can imagine that this starts to really skew. Actual agent cost is, this model is more complex and assumes agents are compensated differently, commensurate to experience, skill set, role, and even schedule. The advantage to this model is that it's highly accurate and provides the least variance of the two methods. The disadvantages are that it's more difficult to maintain cost data per agent. Some organizations have actually integrated with HR or accounting databases to populate and maintain this information automatically. It's also important to note that only a limited number of service management vendor solutions track by actual agent cost. It's not as important to determine one being better than the other at this stage, but it's extremely important for you to know which way your ticketing solution tracks. As an IT professional, you first have to decide if average agent cost method puts you or your organization at risk of missed project budgets or support budgets. We can make available to anyone joining this webinar a simple yet effective report or model that can help you determine which method will work best in your environment. And so I'm going to actually take you through some of that. So this is a representative slide. This is a summary tab of a 4-tab worksheet designed to help you determine your risk. In this example, we looked at a service desk with 9 employees, 6 full-time and 3 interns, all part of an assigned to the first level support group. Each employee is compensated differently based on experience, tenure, skill set, and schedule. And I wanted you to note that there are a few people on this environment that were interns. So if you have interns on your support desk, you're at even greater risk of significant variance of cost because intern compensation can dramatically pull down the average agent cost. All agents were supporting the same end users and logging the same incidents or call types. The number of calls and call duration was tracked and logged, and the average agent cost method returned an total agent cost of $5,408.07, while the actual agent cost method returns a total agent cost of $3.43. That's about a difference of 11%. Many of you saying, that's okay. That variance is pretty good, but that's for all incidents, for all people, over the duration of this model. But where it really has a big impact is at the incident type level. Average cost methods for a printer, for example, is $79, if you look at that line, $79.97, versus the actual cost method is $132.30. That's a tremendously big difference. It's almost double. Justifying a decision that could potentially save the organization money for either maintaining internal support of printers or outsourcing them to a third party becomes very challenging when you have this kind of variance. So again, we'll refer back to the slide in the presentation or the model, and I'm sure you'll have questions later about how these, where we came up with these calculations in the Q&A section. I'll be happy to spend more time on that. So for the time being, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next benchmark duration.
Eric, it's interesting about this report because I work at a university level or a higher ed institution, and a lot of my help desk or service desk analysts are students. So we're looking at a big difference in costs, and that spreadsheet or that model will really point that out when I start using it. So you've opened up a can of worms for me.
I want you to be aware of it. Now, what you do with it is your determination.
All right, so let's talk duration, time, and incident duration, call duration, resolution time, etc. They're all different names for basically the same thing. How much time was spent to resolve or close an issue? Another way of thinking, what is the length of time a ticket or incident is open or not pending? This way of tracking time duration of incidents in the open status is the primary way most service management or incident management solutions track time. The advantages to this method is that it's very easy to report and can be fully automated. But we all know that just because a ticket is open or is in an open status, it's not necessarily requiring resolution resources from agents. And therefore, agent costs shouldn't be calculated for the entire time the ticket is open, but only when the services are actually being performed. In order to solve this problem, there are many different thoughts. One way to approach this is to adopt a hard-coded industry best practice metrics for each incident type as the basis for reporting metrics. But there are several potential problems with this method. First, your organization is different. And second, you will have no visibility into how strategy changes impact the effectiveness of the organization. Another way is to track or only track time duration when an incident window is open in the application and a dialog window is open on the agent screen. But how would you input time spent resolving an issue when required to step away from the agent workstation? And also, this method forces an agent to have multiple dialog windows open and doing alt tabbing back and forth between incidents. There are two more primary methods of tracking duration which warrant our attention. One, manually track effort via agent input or a hybrid model, or open ticket tracking and effort tracking. So let me explain each of them in a little bit more detail. Number one, manual effort tracking. This requires the agent or technician to manually input the actual time they spend on each task. While this is a very accurate method of effort tracking, it has one very critical flaw. It requires that the agent to actually track and input data. But all kidding aside, seriously, those vendor solutions that track effort in this manner, and there are a few of them, they've attempted to address this problem by automating this process as much as possible, by creating required field entries in order to submit, close, change, augment, or edit a ticket. But there's still an opportunity for significant error by your agents. The second model, hybrid or open ticket and manual effort tracking. This provides the advantages of both manual and automated tracking, but has limited disadvantages. It allows IT organizations to automatically track duration of open issues that can be resolved while in contact with either an agent, either on the phone, or once a self-service issue has been opened by an agent. So examples of some of these incident types can be a password reset, information request, connectivity, etc., etc. Agents will typically have multiple status options or task options that they can select from various types of effort. These actions or tasks may automatically enter in typical duration times, but still allow the agent the option to manually override and change entries to best reflect actual effort. Additionally, incident types that require greater effort or multiple resources may need agents to manually enter effort duration in order to resolve or close. This method is extremely advantageous in that it provides the most accurate baseline of any of the methods. However, it's still slightly dependent on manual input from agents. Again, we can see how important accurate tracking of duration is by referring back to our example. So let's take a look at this model. Using the same spreadsheet we used earlier, but now we're on a different tab, we can see just how important incident duration is quickly determining support desk efficiencies. This slide shows agent efficiency by incident type. This is just a snippet of the entire incident list, but you can see the example in the cells highlighted in yellow show that Ava Michaels and Gregory Jones have a great disparity in cost per incident for password resets. Look at this. Gregory takes 2 times longer to resolve the same incident type than Ava, and happens to be paid at a much higher rate, resulting in a much higher cost per incident. Look at the pinkish orange example. That shows Sam Nichols, an intern, is resolving incidents more quickly than Kendra, resulting in a per incident cost far less than the team's average. So does this mean that Sam is very good at resolving network-related issues? Or is it possible that Sam's resolutions are not accurate and may result in new incidents being logged? By leveraging statistics on the reopened tickets based on unsuccessful resolutions, you should be able to understand whether networking is a strong skill set of Sam's or if he needs to spend some time shadowing Kendra. Let's look at the last example in the blue cells. Compare cost per incident for connectivity issues. Paul costs 4 times as much to resolve an issue as Billy. Perhaps you may want to evaluate implementing skills-based routing or connectivity issues to Bill. I hope by pointing these out that you can see that these benchmark metrics start to open up significant reporting questions. And it's important that by understanding time and costs metrics, you can begin to transform your support desk environment. Again, this model or this spreadsheet is going to be available to anyone who would like a copy, and we'll have our contact information at the end of this webinar.
So I think this brings us to cost avoidance. This is the last example of fundamental or critical benchmarking metrics, and as you can guess, we have saved the best for last. This category might be considered more of a key performance indicator or KPI rather than a benchmark because it implies moving the department or the entire organizational needle forward or backward. Let's discuss what cost avoidance means to an IT professional. Cost avoidance is described as any action taken to reduce future costs, such as replacing parts before they fail or can cause damage to other parts. Cost avoidance may incur higher cost up front, but the final or life cycle cost ultimately would be lower. Other words that are sometimes used in place of cost avoidance are cost mitigation, payback, ROI, found money. That one's my favorite. But this is some of that language and speak that you might be hearing at some of those executive level meetings. Bottom line, cost avoidance is saving the company money and proving it. So how do you prove it? Well, you prove it with accurate benchmarking. There are many examples in IT service management where cost avoidance can be documented and proven. For example, asset replacement. And we're going to be discussing asset replacement a little bit later. Availability resourcing. Understand what impacts new projects, initiatives, and milestones, and what those impacts will have on the availability of resources from a hardware, software standpoint. And having those benchmarks available to prove financial risks that having limited availability would pose to the organization, or the benefits of additional hardware resources. Bandwidth provisioning is another one. Bulk pricing negotiations, etc. I think you get the idea. Now let me show you exactly what cost avoidance means using asset replacement as the example. So this again is one of the tabs of the model that we've been utilizing today. This is an example of a report that can be derived by utilizing the cost and duration benchmarks and applying them to cost avoidance KPI. So I just want you to kind of look at this real quick. This is around hardware-related, or excuse me, incident types and the asset IDs, where they're located, where that asset is in its life cycle since it's been purchased, their initial cost, where its value is today, the number of incidents, lifetime incidents, and the cost of those incidents. This is just some examples, and I've dummied these down just a little bit so they make sense to everyone. Your organization might have different terms that you utilize, but they essentially mean the same thing. So imagine if this is a report that talks about the most costly asset being the most costly on top. Imagine if this report was part of a standard dashboard report or model that could be made available to an executive management team, or at the very least, the IT manager, so that you could effectively determine the best strategy for asset lifecycle management. Better yet, what if this information could be made instantly available to a support agent or analyst when an issue is created for any of these at-risk assets, any assets that's approaching a predetermined cost threshold? And what if it could let that agent know that they should provision a new asset and create a service request versus trying to resolve the issue? Well, honestly, I have to let you know that there are only a few off-the-shelf solutions that address the first part, let alone addressing the more complex issue of making recommendations, where they correlate all of assets, availability and service management and project. So with that being said, what do you do next? So Eddie, I think maybe you should take this.
So strategy for implementing benchmarking, how to start? That's a great question. You need to think about your organization's current maturity level and take a continuous improvement approach. Leverage the templates and models in today's presentation as a starting point. Use the questions in the Power of Accurate Benchmarking slide and begin asking yourself these questions. Do you have the data to answer them? If so, ensure your benchmark metrics are accurate. Do you know what your costs are? Average cost may be a starting point, but as was pointed out today, using average cost is providing an inaccurate point, or it's providing inaccurate information to your executive team. If you need to, go to your HR department and obtain the numbers. Plug the numbers in, and I'm confident you're going to be very surprised. It's easy to go back to your management team when you have real data. Measure against baselines and continually raise the bar.
So armed with the awareness of the three most critical IT benchmarks and KPIs, you can produce meaningful and dependable reporting to drive efficiency, effectiveness, and monitor strategy. Here are some of the many questions you'll be able to address utilizing the benchmarks 1 and 2, cost and time, and the fundamental KPI, cost avoidance. I'm just going to give you some time to take a look at these. In the next slide, again, these are all parts of our dashboard or reports that we've seen before, but we need to get a great understanding of where these metrics are derived. Okay, I think we need to summarize.
Okay, Eric, so let's do that. It's hard to summarize what we discussed today because I feel that what Eric and myself presented today was already a brief summary of critical IT benchmarks and KPIs. But to summarize a summary, think like a microbiologist. What are the building blocks for my reports? How accurate are they? What can I do to make them more accurate? Also, understand that your IT or service environment is different from other environments. No, seriously, it really is. Just because someone else says you should shoot for a 5-minute response time doesn't mean that it's right or cost-effective for your organization. Or maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you should be targeting 1-minute response times because that would be even more cost-effective for your organization. The bottom line is rely on your own benchmarks and strive to improve from those baselines. Speak the same language as the executive team. Reduce costs might mean spend more here to save there. Provide reliable project and cost justification so you are invited to the table, and more importantly, you want to remain there. Average agent costs and actual agent costs are not the same thing. And it can create a great cost variances, ultimately putting you in the hot seat. Duration, measurements are not uniformed across all IT organizations. If so, all solution vendors would track and report uniformly. My favorite, no more archaeological, and I need to learn how to say this word, archaeological digs. Set you and your organization up to have dependable data at your fingertips. When asked for information by the executive team, put yourself in the situation to supply the information as quickly and as accurately as possible. Doing so sends a message that you run a tight ship. Cost avoidance. It's the third benchmark in KPI. With all the budget cuts you've experienced, find some money in the cracks. Find some money in the KPIs. But before we address questions, I'd like to thank you, Eric and Ken and Summits, for having me participate in this webinar. It's been a great learning experience. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, Eric.
No problem. I appreciate having you. So while we've been going through this, there have been a bunch of different questions that have been brought up. I'm just looking at some of these, and I think I'll try to pick some that I think are probably the most relevant. We've been talking a lot, so I haven't had as much time to go through them, but one of them is, my incident tracking solution only tracks duration from when a ticket was created, and that says until it's closed. So I'm guessing that you open the ticket, and it has a start time and a close time. Typically, this can be days. How can I apply accurate benchmarks to my environment? You know, that's a really good question. So I think depending upon if you're utilizing out-of-the-box or off-the-shelf solution, many of those solutions would provide some type of customization or configuration of additional fields. And you may want to start to test on certain areas, certain call types or incident types, doing some effort tracking by creating a manual field that your agents would need to populate some information to start as a benchmark or create a baseline. And what Eddie and I have been talking about today doesn't necessarily mean you need to come back to these models all the time. You simply need to create a baseline to see when you have strategy and you change.
This conference is now in question and answer mode. To alert the speaker that you have a question, press 1, then 0.
So we'll explain that in just a second. But so as you're going through this, you need something to create a baseline, and then you start to try strategies. For example, you might implement skills-based routing. How does that impact your baselines? Is it moving in the right direction? So it's not something that you have to do on a daily basis if you don't have those benchmarks or baselines as part of your reporting tool, whether it's off the shelf or not. It's something you need to do periodically. Eddie, do you have anything you want to add to that?
It's interesting that you say that, because in one of the areas that I'm in now, we're actually using a SharePoint form to track all our incidents and service requests. And one of the areas that I have is user account management, and we have a lot of incidents, and we don't know how much time they're taking. So we're going to start putting in a field, a drop-down field to put, and like we talked about in the presentation, it's an estimate. It's not going to give us the greatest benchmark, but it's a start. And we're starting to implement that over here. So I think it's important.
I think you bring up a good point. We keep saying this throughout the presentation, that you need to create a baseline. But in order for you to understand the effectiveness of any strategy, you need to understand how those metrics were created and where the fallacies or gaps could be in those metrics. so that you're not using a flawed metric as a basis for all of your justification. You've got to start somewhere. Another question that's along this vein, and then I think we'll open it to some Q&A. You guys can ask some questions, or we can continue along this chat session or version as well. Somebody asked, your presentation stated that it's best to track actual agent cost versus average agent cost. We use average agent cost for our benchmarks. How do we switch if our solution doesn't support this? And I need to be clear here. The presentation that Eddie and I gave didn't state that it's best to track actual agent cost versus average agent cost. There are some gaps with average agent cost. There are certain environments where average agent cost is completely 100% efficient. But if you're running an organization with multi-tiered support, with tenured staff and interns and things of that nature, and you're trying to use an average agent cost, you can understand from our presentation where these numbers can start to skew. And so what's best is for you to understand what model works best in your environment and how your ticketing or our service management solution is calculating these metrics. So if you're using an average agent cost right now and you want to switch, well, I'm not so certain that's the answer, but you need to do exactly what we did for the other one, which is you need to take a baseline. So do the investment right up front with a subset of the group or the whole group finding their actual cost. And again, this model that we created is a great way for you to start and just fill in the numbers there and then pull from your existing reporting, put in the incident types, the duration, and those types of things, and it will start to spit out where you have some of your gaps. And if you're starting to notice big gaps between, let's say, one individual or one group versus another, that will give you determination as to where you should put your next focus. So, Eddie, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I do, because you have to dial it back and take a step back and determine, well, look, you have all these numbers and you have all these reports, but what is it that you're trying to get an answer to? If you're doing the average cost right now and you're getting the answers that you need, maybe stay with that. But now if you're looking at it and saying, hey, you know, I have some individuals on my team and I don't think that they're performing, but I really can't figure out how to measure that, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. Start taking those actual costs. And then you can see, similar to the example that we did in the webinar, that you can have two people trying to solve the same type incident, and one is taking a lot longer than the other, then you can see some gaps there, and then maybe you need to start working on some training issues or mentoring or what have you. But that's the approach I would take. I would start at the beginning and try to understand, well, what is the question that I'm trying to answer? And then drill down from there.
Yeah, the word average is going to come up a lot, and you guys have already utilized this and know this, but you have to get some accurate benchmarks to begin with before you start applying averages. When we start talking about agent efficiency based on incident type or work group or tiered support versus another agent average, duration, and those types of things are extremely critical. And that's where we said earlier that don't get confused with call duration, average call duration up front. You need to know exactly what you're speaking about and how those metrics are applied. Because average duration, is it average duration for per agent? Is it average duration for a particular incident type? It can skew if you're utilizing those metrics when you go in your archaeological dig to justify a project. So I think I want to hear directly from you. We've got a few more of these, but I want to give the opportunity. There's a few questions on the line of some people that actually asked some questions, and so I'd like for you to be able to address those.
I can't take any requests right now. Please try again.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, my name is Paul Carney. I work with Expert IT Operations.
Hello, Paul.
First, I want to say this presentation was very good, and one thing I wanted to add, and that is when you have the metrics and you have your agents and all in order with regards to how much you have to pay them and how they do their work, there's also some other data that you have to capture regarding the assets, regarding some of the trouble and problem ticket situations in order to use the the model for cost avoidance. And one of the things that I wanted to suggest is know where your data resides, so that when you're doing using this actual model, that you're looking at what data exists out there that automatically can be leveraged for the model. And for example, you have the assets, you have the users, you have the HR data, and once you have all that in place, and you leverage the model to look at the metrics and tie it to cost avoidance, tie it to projects, it'll speed up the process. Where don't sit and think that you have to enter all the data in manually. There's resources that you can tap into that already have a lot of the data you need to plug in for the model to work. Does that make sense?
Right. No, Paul, you're so right. It's part of that archaeological dig we were talking about, and understanding where that information can be found and how often that information is refreshed and how it's compiled. From an asset management standpoint, how do you discover your assets? And how do you determine if they're active versus inventoried assets? And are they being factored into the equation when you do your reports? Doing this as long as Eddie and I know many of you have done, you know that going on that archaeological dig for information is extremely time-consuming. And it's rarely replicable based on cost avoidance and justifying these types of things. But Paul, you bring up a very good point in saying that managing IT and service delivery, takes into consideration assets, availability, incident response, and ticketing solutions, as well as project management. So there are a lot of different places where there's siloed data. Understand where that information is. If your solution ties in and integrates with some of that, understand if it's real time versus is it stored data that you're pulling up on a monthly basis.
And projects drive that. For instance, before some of the asset management systems existed, there was some printer management tools and printers are a very heavy area to look at from a cost avoidance perspective.
Got it.
And then you start looking at projects. How many of you guys go out there and you're doing a project, and for instance, I do a lot of electronic medical record consulting, and there's a lot of things they say, okay, make sure all your assets are up to this spec. Well, if you pull that data together and use that, then you're starting to be more effective from a cost perspective. So anyhow.
Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate that, because these are some of the topics in our upcoming webinars. I wanted us to spend some time here. There's a lot of requests right on this from questions that I've seen, people wanting to get their hands on the models. And again, these models are not designed to replace anything. They don't do ticketing, but they take some of the reports and information, raw data you might have, and you can apply them to some of these models to see if what you expected to see is actually the case. And this exercise gives you visibility into how your ticketing or service management solution is actually tracking information. So it arms you with asking the right questions. It also prepares you to be able to answer those questions when they're asked upon you. So you can see September 13th, we're having Enabling the IT Service Team to Do More. September 27th, Financial and Operational Benefits of Implementing Best Practices. In October 18th, it's been changed, Unifying ITSM with, and this is more focused to the SUMAS environment, with SUMAS Service Management. So I would like to I've got a couple pieces. If you wanted to get a hold of me and get the contact me for the model, you can send me an email or call me to Eric Wagner at SUMAS Software, eric.wagner@sumasoftware.com, and I'll be happy to get those out to you. And then also, when you registered, I don't know, Ken, if I'm stealing your thunder, but when you registered for this event, and also on the SUMAS website, we have a giveaway for an iPad on a monthly basis. And Terry Collins with The Pantry won this month's giveaway. So congratulations to Terry Collins. At one time, I think I saw that she was actually scheduled to attend this webinar as well. So with that, Ken, I'm going to pass it back to you to wrap us up.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Eric and Eddie, for your excellent presentation. And I want to thank everybody for joining our webinar, Benchmarking IT and Critical KPIs, and I look forward to having you attend our future webinars. Again, thank you very much.